Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode. This is episode 99. So our guest is on the cusp of our 100th podcast, which is quite an achievement for us. And I want to thank all of the guests who have been on the Artist Index In Focus podcast for their support and their generosity with their time to speak with me. And be, bookmark their place in history, especially now. COVID has been so crazy that it's delayed a lot of things, but the announcement should be coming shortly. I may have said that before, but we are working in collaboration with the Whaling Museum and their Common Ground project. And all of the podcasts that we've done, 1 through 99 and 99 forward, are going to be digitized and archived into the Whaling Museum's database, so that listeners can listen to it, far into the future, whatever the medium is going to be that's going to hold all these records. So let me start the official opening. Thanks once again for joining us on the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the South Coast Artists Index and sponsored generously by Heavenly Spirits Importers, who make this production possible, and also the Mass Cultural Council. So with all of that out of the way, I'd like to have our guests introduce themselves as per usual.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is John Jameson. It's spelled like the whiskey. It's John Jameson. I emphasize.
Speaking of the whiskey,
a lot of people put in the I. Yeah, that ties in with the sponsor really nicely.
Exactly. And I don't know. We'll have to ask Daniel Cooney, who's the owner of Heavenly Spirits, and he deals primarily with French spirits. But it seems that either the Celts, the Irish and the Scots learned how to make their whiskey from the French, or the other way around. And I'm getting a real funny feeling it's the other way around. But in the history of spirits and wine, there's a real interesting interplay between the United Kingdom and France. And one of the most famous anecdotes is that the wine Haut-Brion was considered the top of its craft. And Haut-Brion is not a French wine company. It's based in France. It was founded, I believe, in 1749, when the British decided they were going to screw with the landed gentry of Scotland and Ireland. And this family came over across the channel and founded their business there. And her name is O'Brien, but the French pronounce it Haut-Brion. So, you just never know where things are going to come from. So, John, you're a painter. I saw your work a couple of weeks back. Totally astounded.
Thank you.
For a couple of reasons. Do you mind if I call you a traditionalist or a classicist?
A good friend of mine said, defined himself as using traditional methods, but not a traditionalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that so much. I'd like to steal it, because I think it's I don't find myself kind of bound by the dogma of, traditional art, classical art, things like that. But I do think that there's something. I do primarily oil painting, and oil painting is a very old art form and you could see it as like bound by a lot of the baggage of tradition. But like what I think is that I like to use the material, and I like to use the material for its strengths. Oil paint specifically for being able to go back and forth between opacity and translucency and transparency and the ability to work in layers. I feel like that's something that has been done throughout the tradition of it as a medium. So I want to take advantage of that. So I think that there's a lot of connection between my work and studying those traditional methods so I can use them as best I can to fulfill the imagery that I want to use. But I try not to feel too stuck by, I think if I had to say, I'd be more of a traditionalist and I'm much less of a classicist. I'm a bit more of a romantic if I had to define myself.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I might have gone a little bit off track.
No. It's funny because sometimes it's almost like having, not being able to see our nose on our own face. Somebody else has to describe it to us, or we have to look into a mirror. And or sometimes we think we're going down a certain path, and we discover years later, whoa, I'm not even close to doing what I thought I was doing. It's something, it's really a strange practice, being a painter. And I think now with social media, especially, we are bombarded with imagery of other people's work. Yes. So we look at people's work involuntarily. In other words, it's pops in front of us, and then their level of success, our opinion of their level of success is gauged by whatever it is we read that accompanies their images. It's kind of crazy.
I mean, one thing to the note of that, of like how my work could be read as more traditional, is that I do think a lot about social media and like what you're describing as like the bombardment of imagery. And what I do think that like in using oils, which the way that I work with them and the way a lot of people work with them, it's slow because it dries slow. And if you want to work wet onto dry, as I do, you might have to wait a week, 2 weeks, a month if you're painting certain pigments really thick between sessions on any individual painting. So it's a very slow process. And I think it's not quite conducive to social media. And I don't think of it as like necessarily frustrating. But I think it does. I like to be a little bit in opposition to that bombardment of imagery, because I think with the bombardment of imagery, you have a certain disposability of the imagery that a culture produces. Mm-hmm. And one thing I enjoy about like things that are more based in more traditional methods is there's a certain timelessness in something that has been, it's a record of that extreme focus of the use of the materials in making and in service to that image, whatever it may be, across time and culture, things like that.
Yeah, I was just flashing back to a girl with a pearl earring, which blanked out on the, it's a French name, the author's name. It'll come back to me at some inappropriate time. But
yeah. You mean the book?
Yes, the book. And Greet, the main character. I mean, if you didn't fall in love with the whole concept of where the book was going on the first couple of pages, with her, for the people she worked for. She was a domestic, and the people she worked for would happen to be Jan Vermeer. And she's arranging them. Doesn't know why, but she's arranging them as though she was arranging a palette. And in the book, Tracy Chevalier, that's the woman's name. And at some point in time, Greek gets the confidence of Vermeer to enter his studio, which was almost a sanctum sanctorum. And she's mulling pigment. And, even though he attained a master's level, I did have instructors who were very Zen oriented, and they said that this preparation, of which people of our generation, are not patient enough with process. And this idea of mulling the paint, because that's why the explosion of the Impressionism, because all of a sudden they stuck in a tube for you. You'd have to go through the whole thing. But there is this mental process of preparing yourself. I mean, how are you? I mean, as a painter, do you have your brushes all lined up? Is your palette arranged a certain way?
Oh yeah. You bring that up, and I do think about, because I don't grind my own pigment. I might be a little bit too impatient for that, or I'd be worried about. I'd be like inhaling powdered cadmium in my face.
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
If you would even get it.
But I'm quite, and I think that in paintings of old, that like I think of Rembrandt a lot, because Rembrandt was a master of grinding his own paint, and you can tell, especially between the early and late Rembrandt, you see that he has an intention with like how finely ground his pigment is from painting to painting. And it's really fascinating to think of like how, I mean, I guess this goes back to what I was saying, but like the needs of the material translate into the needs of the imagery, which I think is really interesting. So I am fairly methodical about how my paint is laid out. I think it's pretty standard, but I try to go through the spectrum. I go from, I keep a big mound of titanium white. I sometimes would use a lead white, but I tend to stick to titanium. But I go from titanium white to lemon yellow. I go through the spectrum, going from a yellow to the orange, to the red, to the violet, and so on. And I usually do earth pigments a little bit. I mean, same thing, like a burnt sienna is like an orange. So that'll be like, it'll be down the line. I'm trying to use my words right, because it's a podcast and not use hand motion. But like the burnt sienna will be down below the cat orange, because it's kind of orange, things like that. And I'll have like some of the darker earths that I usually only use at the early stages of painting. I have all the way on the opposite end. So that's where I'll have my ivory black, Payne's gray, and if I'm using a burnt umber, I'll put it over there. And that's less to the logic of the spectrum, but it's more like I started doing that when I started painting, before I arranged in my palette in such a methodological way. So I try to keep the habit like that. I figure if I already know what color it is without even looking on my palette, then I get that muscle memory, and I feel like that helps.
Yeah. I as you were describing that, all I could think of was, Mr. Miyagi on the Karate Kid. It's the imprinted. Yes. It's imprinting. Wax on, wax off. Left hand, right hand, because setting up that palette that way has to occupy a space in your brain. The go-to. And it's really, really interesting. When did you? I try to ask everyone, when did you get bit by this art bug? When did you have that? Some people call it aha moment. Some people have a what the heck moment. Some people have that moment of realizing that they never had the moment, that it was always natural to them and they were always supported?
That's a good question. I've thought about that a lot because I remember that in art school, I remember that most of my peers had a start that felt a lot earlier than my start. Like I drew a lot at the kitchen table as a kid growing up, but like I did a lot of things as a kid growing up that I didn't turn into my life. Like I played a lot of basketball in the driveway, and I like to ride my bicycle, and I don't do those for a living, you know. So
Yeah.
um so the thing that got me is I remember that I've always been a bit of a daydreamer. I always like to think and ponder about things, sometimes get sort of obsessive, and I have been a very visual person. So I remember that like I had some very good art teachers in high school, and we even take turns like sitting and drawing portraits from life as early as I think I was in like 10th grade starting doing that, and I really enjoyed that. And I remember from there, and I've read a lot, and I kind of wanted to be a writer when I was in high school and things like that, just kind of drawn to creative things. I was into music, but I wasn't very good at it. I think I mostly liked I liked listening to the music, and I liked to engage with it, but I don't think I had any talent for it, you know? So
Mhm.
so I had this kind of urge to be creative without any facility for it. And then but I got really into the art classes I was taking in high school. And then when it came time to pick a major and you go to school, and I think I was telling you this when you were visiting my studio, that when I first started school, you know, you go through the freshman program, and you take a bit of your graphic design, you take a bit of your drawing. And the thing that really got me, I was in Ellen Lewis Watson's life drawing class. It's like the 101 level. And I remember going into college thinking that I might want to become an illustrator. I liked comics books and a lot of things like that. But then taking this life drawing class and feeling the charcoal in my hands and like doing this big like sweeping gesture and getting into the poses, and then ultimately taking painting classes and getting into color and color theory and texture, it seemed like there was just so much of my brain that was turning on, that it was things that were already there inside of me, but finally I had a medium and a method to express them.
Right.
So
And an outlet. And an outlet.
yeah, outlet. That's the word I want to use. Yes. So I guess the short answer is life drawing really was the aha moment, because I was starting to connect to the process of seeing and turning that into a making and reacting, rather than thinking of it in a more literal sense of like, here's the thing I want to make, and these are the steps I'm taking to make the thing. I think I got more involved in sort of the questions that get brought up as you're in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Now let's roll it back. Where did you go to high school?
Somerset High School.
Okay. They've had an excellent art program there for quite some
Yeah, some
time
really
now.
good
It's almost like a dynasty now, right?
Yeah, it's really good. I had Steve Meehan was a really big. You might have met him because he went to school at UMass Dartmouth too, and he studied with Sig and stuff.
Okay.
But
I was
he
there before SIG.
yeah.
Because I got out in 75, so I'm like ancient.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know who talks to
Yeah.
who at openings and things.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But yeah, I had a lot of classes with him, Miss Troutman, and he even did my senior year. He did a art history class, which I don't know too many high schoolers that got to take art history. It's kind of rare.
And the only ones that I know of are the ones that were in advanced AP art history.
Yeah.
and they shipped them over to, well, it ended up in my class at Bristol Community College,
Oh, okay.
which was kind of interesting. But that's fantastic to have it right there.
Yeah. No, I mean that was another thing that I think that didn't necessarily convince me that I wanted to uh, pick up a brush and keep painting for the rest of my life. But the thing that like art, like taking an art history class did, is made me look at a broader sense of culture in every individual's conscious or unconscious participation in it. And it made me very excited, really just sort of about like the continuation of human expression and achievement.
Yeah. Now, from the high school you went to,
I went to UMass Dartmouth.
okay, and what were some of your instructors? I think you named one.
Yeah, I had Severin Haynes. Bill Elliott was a really big early, like that was, I think, the second painting class. And that was the one that we started doing portrait painting and things like that. That was excellent. Anthony Fisher was an early instructor of mine. And I also had a lot of his drawing classes. He was fantastic.
Mhm.
Anthony Moralia was my senior instructor. And yeah, I mean, I have nothing but great things to say about, I've been really lucky in my education. I had a lot of fantastic instructors, particularly, I mean, I had great instructors too in grad school, but the thing that I enjoyed about the group of instructors I had from UMass is that they all had a very personalized approach to me, at least. I felt like I didn't feel like Anthony Fisher was necessarily telling me to paint like Anthony Fisher, you know. Though you know, we did I did a lot of the experiments with the really heavy impasto paint, which was very exciting. But you know, I don't think he was calling on that. And all of them, it seemed like they were all trying to get me to think for myself and to see things.
There's
Yeah.
a legacy there. There's a definite legacy. I remember when I was interviewed at the University of Miami for graduate school, one of the first words out of the chairman's mouth was, "Where the hell did you go to school?" Which I didn't quite know how to take because, that was kind of a shock, and it was a compliment to the instructors. And when you said drawing, yeah, the drawing program there has always been this incredible. I think everybody should take a drawing course, regardless of their affectations, regardless of their predilections, to the arts or otherwise, because it's when you're with other professionals and they ask, what do, you can basically say, I'm a trained observer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember, and you look at the human form so differently. You learn things, for example, when you see a model, you know that the model has like 3 stages of pose. The one where they're setting up, and then the one where the second stage when they're settled in, and then between the second stage and the third stage is the breakdown. I mean, gravity is starting to take over, their muscles are getting tired, so on and so forth. But a lot of people just don't pay attention to that. Yeah, I can see how that happened. So where'd you go to grad school?
I went to grad school at the New York Academy of Art.
Excuse me. No, it's a very prestigious school. Congratulations. Where were you sort of, was the instruction, if any, arm's length, or was it intense?
The studying was quite intense. It was quite rigorous. Took a lot of I had I don't think I could call it honestly a minor in anatomical studies.
Mm-hmm.
I think they called it anatomy track. So so I did a lot of things like that. And I had a lot more if UMass had a focus on things that were based Impressionism and post-Impressionism and getting up to, I remember talking about like Giacometti and Matisse and Cezanne a lot. And the Academy did, I mean, it had, oddly enough, more references to contemporary art, but it also had a lot more references to the 19th century and earlier and things like that. So, which is nice because like between the two schools I had, I have like a really wide breadth of studying from different examples in art history and things. Yeah, so I did a lot of, one thing that was nice in grad school is, I mean, I met a lot of great artists there, both students and instructors, and a lot of interesting courses that I don't hear too much about. Like I took, I think 3 courses in écrochet, which is this interesting study of sculpture. It's a way of studying anatomy, not through drawing, but through sculpture. So what you do is you sculpt the skeleton, and then you learn each of the aspects of the structure of every bone. And then you learn how to connect the muscle tissues and layer it from one to the other to the other. I even took one project I did. I used calipers and like measured like the structure of my own skull and just tried to imagine what my skull looked like. And then I added the layers of muscle on my face afterwards. And I don't think it turned out very good, but the practice of looking in the mirror and thinking like, what was my cheek doing there? And, you know, where the things connect.
It creates an awareness.
You become aware of it, and you think of the morphology and how there's a function to the things that you're seeing in the mirror. And it certainly changed how I saw the model on the stand, and it changed especially how I see a portraiture and things like that. Really fascinating. And that's just one class I took. I had an excellent class painting at the Metropolitan Museum, and I could copy some of the paintings there and really learn about the way that those things are, historical paintings, that is, constructed and built and thought about. And I think that's something that really got into my head, if not immediately after taking the course. More recently, I feel like I've been thinking a lot about how every artist, between what they see and what they make, there's a connection between the process of like layering, between like if you start off with a thin underdrawing, is the underdrawing in color or is it in a grisaille or black and white? And all of those decisions, they're all reflective of what each artist is seeing and how they think about what they see. And it's not necessarily, like, I'm not big on pre-prescribed methods. I like the idea that there's an interpretation of reality that is taking place when you're making an image. So I really try to take that to heart in the studio. And I feel like I've gone a little bit off track. Just
no, you haven't. In fact, as you're speaking, I mean, my mind's bouncing around through a bunch of other things because, yeah, you've got this Raoul Middleman. I believe he's from Maryland Institute. He's getting up there in age, prolific beyond belief, but alla prima, bang. I mean, it just, just slams on the paint. And then you've got, these other painters who, with the grisaille, they start, it's layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. And again, there's this, it's a study in patience as well. I went over to acrylics because I was an abstract painter, and I thought, its immediacy is where it's at. The one thing I didn't like about the color at the time was they were very acidic to me. You could tell an acrylic painting a mile away. And also, I noticed a lot of practitioners were never taught correctly because it's just dull. It just has nothing to it. It's really awful. And that's one thing about then SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University, was materials and techniques. I mean, we were practically, alchemists, you know. But who is your favorite 19th century painter? I mean, the one person that makes you go, ugh, you know.
Oh,
It could be more than one. I mean, like John Singer Sargent, for example, those crisp whites on the crinolines,
yeah.
the pinafores of the young girls, and the way he captures light. It's you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved Sargent. My aunt, in her living room growing up, I remember she had a reproduction of, like the Four Daughters.
Yes.
I'm blanking on the name of the person that commissioned it.
Yeah, somebody
That-
actually juxtaposed that against Las Meninas,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
is kind of interesting. Yeah, Goya's
That
Las
is an
Meninas. It was Goya's.
interesting
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah,
I could
yeah,
see that.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you know Antonio Mancini?
Antonio Mancini.
Um,
No,
like between uh, Antonio Mancini, John Singer Sargent, and Anders Zorn.
Anders Zorn.
Um,
Yeah,
like I don't know what you could exactly call that style of portraiture. But I think Antonio Mancini, there's a lot of his in the Philadelphia Museum, which I've never been to, which is a shame. But he might be one of my favorites. I'm not trying to pull the obscure card, but the way
right.
that he uses
I think I know his work.
he uses the texture of paint as both light and but you feel because of the texture and the thickness, like
Right.
the contrast
His
between
darks,
thickness
his
and thinness.
darks, glazes and washes, and they recess, and as he comes up in light, the highlights are impasto. It's a bang,
Yeah,
and with Sargent, for example, it was such an impresario, a virtuoso. He made it look so effortless.
hmm
He made it look like it was dashed off much faster than I assume it actually was. You know, but there's a craft there, and it's that craft that is all important, and practicing as an abstract artist for years. Well, there's a whole bunch of things that comes along with that. I mean, to try to be a successful abstract painter in a historic New England seacoast town is a bit of a stretch, Um, but which reminds me, you had two commission pieces. I don't remember where they were. One of them was Frederick Douglass, and the other one, um,
was Albert Pinkham Ryder.
Albert Pinkham Ryder. That's right. That's right.
Who
Tell us about
I've
those.
also been like a huge fan of, and it was kind of funny because I became a fan of Albert Pinkham Ryder when I was in New York City, and I didn't realize that he was from New Bedford until after I got back from grad school, which is
Hmm.
actually kind of stunning. Um, Similarly, so like a big fan of his, and it's kind of amazing. It's amazing that Albert Pinkham Ryder isn't a bigger name in New Bedford right now. Like I would think, I mean, I think among the art community, the name comes up more, and that the show at the Whaling Museum was just tremendous. So I mean, I like the idea that more people could know about him now.
Right.
It's wild to think of just how influential and fantastic the art that has come out of this region has been. And if I had a hope for the future, I would hope that people that are from this area should know and study that history and that community, because there's a lot of things that have been kind of buried and forgotten.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
I,
began. That's what began this journey those years ago. Clipping out a newspaper ad in what was the Sunday section back then, I think called the Bowsprit magazine. Mary Jean Blasdale, who was the art curator for the Whaling Museum, had about 125 names, and she wanted to create this directory of New Bedford painters. And the books only had one printing, and if you can find a copy in good shape, it's like $600. And her plea was a birthday, a date, anything, you know. So she went from 1749, I think, approximately to 1949. And there were a lot of people in there. I mean, yeah, you know, people think about Beardstodt. I think Bradford is finally coming to his prominence now. You know, there are people who have always known about him, but for some reason, you know, the names are coming. You know, the Ashleys. I mean, there's so many of them, and they were, you know, during their day and age, during post impressionism, you know, that they were covered over by that. But yeah, this city is phenomenal in so many different ways as far as that's concerned. The writers I had heard about, you know, his work in undergraduate school, and I also heard about his quirks. You know, the idea that he was his house was there was a path from the door to the easel, and from the easel to the outhouse, and then from the easel to the kitchen, where he kept a perpetual pot of soup. It was the pot was never emptied, never washed. He just kept adding to it.
That's wild.
He just kept adding to it. Yeah, he was a bit of an eccentric. And some of his work, I remember my painting instructor would say, there was a piece in the Metropolitan, I think it was. He said they practically have to put a net over it because he would put coffee grounds. He really either A, didn't care, B, was ignorant, or C, he was just cheap, and used whatever was at hand. So you've got to wonder, but when you look at the work, there's that hand, and the application of paint is just, gosh, yeah, it really is a turn on to visually to see that application of paint. You know?
Well, like, I mean, you look at those paintings now, and particularly his depiction of moonlight, I find they hold up and they feel fresh. I mean,
Yep.
in a way, they feel. There's something about great art that it always feels like it was. You know, it's hard to imagine a time that it didn't exist. It just
Yeah,
seems,
it's always been. It's always been. It's timeless. It's ethereal.
like if you were to dig up from like the ruins of Pompeii and you found an Albert Pinkham rider and just tell me that ancient Roman saw the moon under this light, I'd
Right.
believe it. It looks like an ancient moon, but it also looks like a moon that I could see out my window tomorrow night. I mean, I don't know the face of the moon right now, but you know, something like that. And I think that's a really interesting quality of art.
It is. I mean, those particular neoclassical pieces that he did didn't look like he was painting in the style of, you know, because it was such a hot thing, you know, back then. But it looked like he was in that place and in that space painting it. You know, he was in Greco-Roman times actually doing the work. There's just this vibe to his work that is just the atmosphere, the environment. And I'm glad I saw it. You know, my the first four of my pieces of the first body of work that I had done when I left, you know, abstraction about the Arctic whaling expedition. You know, being in the showcase at the Whaling Museum, and then his work in the next room was kind of, I don't know, to me it was kind of cosmic. Something was talking to me and saying, paying attention, you know?
Yeah. That had to have been a thrill. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, being in the same building, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Even if the work was hanging in the bathroom, it would have been a thrill and a half. So the two commissions, Frederick Douglass, he's instantly recognizable as Frederick Douglass, and except or with the exception of one photograph that was taken in New Bedford, where he wasn't scowling
Mm.
You captured a whole new Frederick Douglass. How did that come about? And it's not to say that you didn't capture his essence. You captured the man behind the curtain.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, there's only so much that I can glean from what I read before and what I read in preparation to do that. It's primarily based on a slightly later photograph of him. I don't, if you asked me like the week that I finished the commission, I would have been able to tell you the year, but I don't quite remember now.
Yeah. I think he sat for that portrait in New York when he was living there. Or,
I believe
home
so.
in New York. Yeah.
I mean, so the most. I mean, obviously, there was a lot of color work and things that I made some subtle decisions about how I wanted him to feel on the surface of the painting in itself. But the most consideration I gave to, like, the biggest decision in my eyes that I did for the painting is that rather than painting him as the young man that he was when he was living in New Bedford, which would be more appropriate, I think. In a lot of ways, that would make sense because it's the commission was for historic New Bedford residents, and I didn't paint Frederick Douglass as he was when he was in New Bedford. But I wanted to paint him as an older, wiser man because I didn't quite like the idea of merely painting Frederick Douglass as someone who, at that point in time, was getting their footing in the community and as a public speaker. And rather than doing that, I sort of wanted to depict him as someone that had more of the accomplishments under his belt rather than just starting out. Because I thought that'd be a better tribute to him. And I think that's what people have responded to. Like when people have talked to me about it, they'll talk about kind of his poise and his sort of his confidence looking out at the viewer and things like that. So yeah, I did really enjoy that though. And it's been well received, which is really nice.
It's funny you're speaking about this. I was going to ask you, would you consider juxtaposition of when he was coming up, so to speak, because he was a caulker. That was his occupation in New Bedford, was a caulker, and we really never ever get this timeline of get thee in the carriage or get thee in the coach in Newport when Roach gets him in, brings him to Nathan and Polly Johnson's house. He gets set up as a caulker. That's his occupation, and then the activism. Now, I haven't read a lot about him, but I'd be very, very curious about that because one of the things I found out about recently was he was sent to a plantation where they broke slaves. He was that strong-willed, and they sent him there to be broken, which is about as horrible as my wife's third great-grandmother, who was on a breeding plantation and whose only purpose in life was to produce more slaves to keep the natural increase going, because it was illegal to import slaves from Africa anymore. So it's just kind of interesting. Let's go over to Albert Pinkham Ryder. What did you feel like painting him? I mean, this is like you painted two gods. You painted the god of socialism, and I mean that he was a social god. I mean, he was a leader of, I hate using that term, his people. He was a leader of people in a very, very horrible time. And then you have Albert Pinkham Ryder, who, again, depending on what biographies you read about him, either he was like a total crackpot, or he was he like a puppy, trying to get your attention all the time by being crazy? How did you get into his head?
So the first thing that I the first way that I approached that painting was the scene that's behind him in the painting is taken fairly directly from one of his paintings of some fishermen's huts, I think is the title.
So
Good.
we're looking at the painting in the background, the fishermen's huts.
Yes. So the painting in the background is the fishermen huts, and the way that I felt like I was getting into the head, at the very least, I wanted to get the aesthetic of the piece right before even thinking about it as a portrait. I wanted the entirety of the composition to feel not exactly like his own painting, because I've never seen that one in person. I chose that one specifically really just for its formal qualities, and I thought that it could work. And you can tell if you do a side-by-side comparison, you can see where I've changed it to make it better suited for a backdrop of this portrait. But I wanted to think about it in the sense that it's half of the feeling of the environment that he's standing in is his own painting, and half of it is the type of scene that he would have been familiar with walking in life. Because I believe he primarily worked out of the studio and not plein air, but he would have a memory of all the places and visual phenomena that he was capturing. So the way that I felt like I was getting into his head is I've done a lot of copies in my own study for art, and I feel like that's a really good way to get to know sort of the personality and the mannerisms of artists that you may admire. So I began with the copy, and then when I set out to do the portrait, rather than have him lit by the moonlight that is in the painting, I imagined like a gas lantern out of the field of view. And there's not that many photographs of him. I think I've seen one that's a profile, and I've seen the straight on or like 3/4 view that I used for the reference. And I feel like the profile one, I remember he seemed more poised and somber, and the straightforward one is he has a really striking and piercing gaze, which I slightly softened some of the features in the eyes, because I feel like there is a piercingness to his paintings. They're very impactful with how particularly bright his full moons can look. But I also think that there is that piercingness, but I think that there is a undertone of quietness and serenity to a lot of his work as well. So I felt like in the contrast, I wanted to, if possible, capture sort of both aspects of that.
Yeah, he had
you can only hope, and I never knew the man. I can only guess.
Right.
There's a lot of practical concerns about like wondering if I've done the likeness justice. It's hard. Like when I work from my own photographs, I generally take a lot of photographs and try to combine them in my mind and then on the canvas, trying to get the aspects that I'm intentionally inflecting on in the image. So when both of these commissions, it was an interesting challenge because it used a lot more of that imagination trying to get the aspects of the sitters right.
Where can people see those two pieces? Before I forget to ask you.
Cultivator Shoals in the downtown.
Which is quite a respectable place now. When I was a kid, it was not. I think it was a fisherman's bar. Let's just leave it at that, if I'm correct. But how large are they, by the way?
Off the top of my head, I think the Albert Pinkham Rider was it might be 30 by 35, and I think the Frederick Douglass is maybe 20 by 30, something like that.
Wow, they look absolutely full size.
Yeah,
from the images that I've seen of them.
The Albert Pinkham Ryder one, the head it's like a little bit larger than life size. Mm-hmm. Obviously the Frederick Douglass one is quite a bit smaller than life size because it's a full figure and a slightly smaller canvas.
Yeah. We're gonna start winding this down in just a bit, but what are your aspirations? What are your hopes? I mean, as a painter in this area, so it's going to be a multifaceted question. What opportunities do you see here for not just for yourself but for other painters currently? What opportunities do you feel are going to be presenting themselves in the future, and take it from there?
So creatively, I would like to do. I've been enjoying the trajectory I've been on. I feel like it's funny because I know that we've been talking a lot, and I almost feel like I've talked around what my own personal work is outside of those two commissions. Like I had immediately after grad school, I had a period of time that I was making very in my eyes, they were very abstract seascape paintings, and it was and I was primarily I was going outside and doing plein air abstract work. At least abstract to me. They were still. It's funny. I was listening to the podcast episode you did with was it Don Wilkinson?
Mm-hmm. No, I've done it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was listening to that, and you were talking about like how do you make a horizontal line in an abstract and have it not be a landscape, I think you said.
Yeah, that's a dilemma.
but it's kind of funny because I was making essentially abstract paintings, but I put it on a horizon. I called it a seascape. I mean, sometimes they looked a lot more like seascapes, and they were much more inspired by Impressionism. But I allowed the edges to soften and the textures to build up in a way that sometimes corresponded with the literal space I was trying to paint. And then and other times it was really strictly for formal reasons and to get the essence of light. And so anyways, oddly enough, this is funny because I'm trying to tell my story fast and I'm taking a very long time with it. But anyways, I did that for years. It was like maybe 6 or 7 years working in that fashion. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I realized while still working with the same methods of working outside and then finishing things inside my studio, I'm going to open the door because the dog is scratching at the door again. She got through the peanut butter a lot faster than I thought she would.
Yeah.
So, sorry, a little bit distracted.
That's
so
okay.
I started. So I took those abstract methodologies I was using, and I tried to refine my hand and my observation, and I tried to use a little bit more of what I had learned in school in terms of like more intentionality with color theory in terms of bringing about that sense of luminosity, and but maintaining the impact that the more abstracted seascapes had. And likewise, at the same time, I started working with portraiture and the figure again. So, and again, I'm doing a long answer talking about the fast part of the.
It's okay. You're connecting the dots. It's fine. Yeah.
But so to answer your question, moving forward, that's the trajectory that I have been on. So moving forward, I do see myself continuing to experiment with the application of paint in a way that directly translates from things that I am observing, with an emphasis on that sense of luminosity. I find I'm a lot more interested in textures than I used to be. Like I've been finding I really enjoy when there's like wet seaweed on the beach and just like getting those marks just right. And it feels nice. And you know, how some rocks are smooth and wet and other rocks are rough and dry. I feel like having those in a painting, giving other things other than merely the atmosphere is something I've been a lot more interested in lately. And I would like to do a lot more with the figure in the landscape, and have been interested and been doing some drawings for more narrative paintings as well. We didn't talk about the like the large commission I did for the church in Swansea, which I don't, depending on when this podcast is out, I don't know if the listeners will be immediately able to see that, but I should be releasing the photo. Like I think we're unveiling that sometime by the end of the month. I'm actually going to the church tomorrow to start hanging the frame and measuring things, so it's just right.
The podcast will probably be released previous to that, so you'll be able to use it as a promotional device.
Oh, excellent!
Yeah, to publicize that. St. John of God, is that where it is?
No, it's St. Louis de France.
Oh, okay.
It's close to the.
All right, St. John of God is in Somerset. I'm sorry, St. Louis de France. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very close. It's like a mile away from there.
Yeah.
So, and I found that was interesting, dealing with the biblical narrative and things like that. So I'm interested in doing that as well. I do a lot of plein air painting, which I in acrylic gouache, and I use those lessons to sort of inform the oil painting as well. So that's becoming sort of its own body of work as well, that has a similar but distinct characteristic from the oil painting. So I'll be working on that. So that's what I'm looking forward to in the studio and out of the studio. Right. In the area, I mean, I'm interested in teaching. I'd love to teach more courses. Starting in the winter, I'm going to be teaching some drawing and painting courses through the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, which I'm very excited to start doing. I would love to teach more in the colleges in the area. It's been hard to break through in that. I am teaching some things out of the Kilburn Mill through the New Bedford Arts and Cultural Emporium. I think tonight is the last of my still life course I've run. Next month I'm doing a workshop doing sky painting with them, and I'm going down to Virginia State University later in the month also to do a artist talk and a plein air, I think a drawing workshop, which is very exciting. Right, so looking forward to that.
I mean, this is all interconnected. You're talking about the abstract, and people don't realize that abstract is primarily composition. It's all about composition, and it's really the basis of composition is there. Yeah, there's color, and then there's like light is brought into it, and then at some point emotion can be brought into it, and then whether you're trying to stay away from it or you're trying to introduce it, there's a physical reference, like putting a horizontal line. Like I said, once you put that horizontal line, you're screwed. It's a landscape. It's an abstract landscape. You can't get away from it. But
landscape isn't the worst thing to paint.
No, it isn't. Especially plein air. Plein air seems to have had a resurgence. I don't know if it's another one of the strange byproducts of the pandemic. But I do remember. In fact, there's going to be a couple of podcasts coming up. My private art instructor, Mel Oliveira. I remember painting plein air. This is before I went to college, and she's wondering, who is that guy? Well, Luna, is that her name?
Yeah. She hopped up on some bed.
Yeah.
I opened the door. I couldn't listen to the scratching.
Oh no, that's fine. It's fine. Believe me. We've had cats walking across. It's not a visual thing. I mean, we may at some point in time use the video is going to be archived. But anyway, it's it's a path that you take. It all starts with your education, your instruction. There just seems to be, you know, right now with the pandemic, I don't know, this plein air everywhere. And going back to Mal Oliveira, uh, he said, you know, you're drawing a nude or painting a nude. He says is one thing because there's those stages, the stages of the pose. He said, but Mother Nature doesn't pose for anybody. I mean, your color palette will shift in a matter of seconds, and you have to be aware of that because I see people struggling trying to bring back something that no longer exists in front of them. You know, that boat is already moved over from the right-hand side of the picture plane to the center and over to the left. You can't stop it. You just have to roll with the punches. And I think that you know, when I went to, you know, freshman foundation, what I loved about it was those 6-second poses that everybody would scream about. But it was like, you know, you can you capture this in 6 seconds, 1 or 2, 3 lines maybe if you're that fast. There's so much more to what we do, I think. And as artists, there's so much more that we do in our private practice that either we are completely aware of or we're not aware of until later on at another time. You know, the pieces of work that we look, you know, you look at and it's like, wow, this is I can't believe I did this. And yet at the time, I remember I looked at it, I was like, yuck, you know, I just put it away. And now 10 years later, I bring it out. I was like, what did I know then that I don't know now? Or what do I know now that I didn't know then? Something like that. So,
well, I find like that the nature of working from life, either from the model or for the landscape, is really fascinating to me because I think that things do change, but painting doesn't exist in the nature and then just becomes a painting. All painting, be it representational or abstract, it is an expression of the mind and memory
and moment. The mind in the moment. Yeah.
I think in undergrad, I remember hearing about how Hans Hofmann had the studio out in Provincetown, and he had his students working both plein air and from the model, making work of like various degrees of abstraction. And I find that is fascinating because I think there is a through line throughout the art history that was done like in this area of Massachusetts of work that is done from the wide breadth of human experience. And I think like that can bring about things about formal qualities and observation, but also I think that in itself harkens to how important it is to have narrative and storytelling that is done through the artist that people can appreciate what's being said like that.
It's also important.
Endlessly interesting.
I think it's also important to have a visual education. That's it.
Yes.
Whether you go on with it or whatever, that visual education is much needed, and it's you know, something that I've been fascinated by all of my life. Well, we're going to wrap this up, and I'm going to ask you one question, one simple question. If you could have whatever you wanted right now at this very moment in time, from you know from the standpoint of being a painter, what would that be?
Man, that's a big question. It's just like a genie thing. Sorry, I'm gonna have a long, awkward pause as I think about this.
Well, while you're thinking, I want to reveal something. My
Yes.
wife, I brought her up several times as, you know, with her incredible grace, herself is also a talented artist. And you know, we have these discussions, and she's a designer, so she's got a different part of her brain from painters, where I'm discovering more and more of that. But again, very pragmatic. And she said, you know, do you want to be sustained by your art, or do you want to be supported by it? And I couldn't wrap my head around that until last night, there's a Zoom meeting with the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club. And the woman brought the idea up of she said, I just rather be sustained. If it sells, it'll sell eventually. If it doesn't, then I'm sustained. But the support right now isn't important. And I finally thought about that aspect of, you want to be supported because it's so important in order to be sustained, but you're looking at it backwards. So in that kind of a vein, how do you look at?
Oh, yes. I mean, see, I didn't know how.
Oh, no, I know. And I'm just trying to give you
I mean, obviously, everyone wants to be able to continue to exist. I think I have an answer. I think, like every answer I could ever give, unfortunately, I think I can only give long answers. But I think that
you're a process guy. You can't help it.
In the world in general, if I had a wish, it would be a wish for greater empathy. Because I think empathy is both how art is made and empathy is how art is understood. And I think that when you're being misunderstood, it could either be, the lack of nuance in one's own expression, but it can also be the lack of understanding of the audience in a broader cultural sense. Like going back to what we were saying about the bombardment of imagery with social media and things, I feel like we see so much and find ourselves understanding so little. And I think that with greater empathy, not only would I see better art being made by people, like if even I could be more empathetic, I feel like I could make better work. But also and I think that's true about every artist, I think empathy is the key. But likewise, I think to the general public, if there was a better sense of empathy, they would be able to understand and have patience for the expressions of a broader and more diverse group of people. And I think, so the short answer is empathy. And then I had to hash it out.
No, I think if we roll back when you first brought it up, I think that's a very quotable quote. Something that, you may even be remembered for, because it really does hit the nail on the head. I want to thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me.
I think perhaps best to, either I go to your studio, you come to my studio, because, you want to do this continuation.
Yeah,
we artists need to be in communication with each other, because you just can't work in a vacuum, can't work in isolation. That's for sure. Yes. So with that in mind, I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to roll into the roll out. And well, thank you, folks, for joining us one more time. We thank our guest, John Jameson, and we thank our sponsor, Heavenly Spirit Imports. And that wraps up another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the South Coast Artist Index. And I'm Ron Fortier, your host, and thanks so much. Goodbye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.